And we're on to our next day of the build. The epoxy clay is set overnight, so it's looking really nice there. Our shock cord mount is all nice and dry inside there, so that's looking really good. And like I said, I'm going to mix up some epoxy, and I'm just going to layer a little bit over the top of the shock cord mount, and a little bit on the shock cord into the tube itself, just to give it a little bit more reinforcing. It also makes it smoother because the epoxy will self-smooth, kind of like self-leveling, and that'll make it a lot better for not snagging the parachute should anything be sticking out. It's not going to snag on it. So now we're to the sanding part. We're going to sand the epoxy clay. And then what we're going to have to do after we sand the epoxy clay, we're going to have to actually fill it in with some wood filler too, to get anything that we missed, any gaps or anything of that sort. So you can see that the epoxy looks pretty good all the way around. It's pretty nice. And we're just going to take sandpaper and either wrap it around a round wooden dowel or something, or if you're pretty good at making it form the way you want to. And we'll just sand. And this is 220 grit paper. And you can see that it sands fairly easy. It's already starting to show the scratches from sanding all the way up and down it. And we're just going to try and get this all smoothed out to something a little bit more resembling what we want. We could take and we can wrap sandpaper around just about anything, and that'll work for sanding purposes. Now you see why I keep my tube. I didn't glue on the other part of the tube because I want to be able to handle this in my hand really easy, and it's easier to do it without having all that extra tube on there. So I can just wrap that around and I can sand this way, and we'll just keep sanding until we get this sanded down fairly smooth. Then we're going to take and we'll put wood putty in there. We're going to let the wood putty dry overnight, and then we'll sand that to finish off fill in any other gaps that might be there. So we got some sanding to do, and we'll check in a little bit when we get the sanding down to pretty good, what we want. And like around the nose area, we're going to have to feather that real carefully and get everything feathered around where we like it on the nose. So we'll just work at this, and then we'll do the wood putty part. Alright, we've sanded everything down here pretty good. We've gotten it to the point that I'm happy with it at this point. So now we're going to make sure that any little gaps that might be in here, and like there, you can see there's an unevenness there, we're going to fill that in with wood putty. And that's going to fill in any areas in here where there might be a little bit of a gap, like right here. You probably can't see it on camera, but there's a little bit of a funny fuzzy edge there that I couldn't sand without getting too crazy. So we mixed up our Estes, or not Estes, our Elmer's wood filler. You can buy this stuff in all sorts of sizes. I got a big size because I like to do a lot of rockets. And we mixed it up until I got to about toothpaste consistency. And now I'm just going to literally dab it right onto the fin fillet. And I'm going to let it go thick. I want it thick because I'm going to sand it off, but I want to be sure that we fill in any gaps that the putty didn't get to. And this is about the consistency I also use when I'm doing, don't forget the top, when I'm doing spiral filling. So I'm actually going beyond what the clay covered, and I'm dabbing this all the way down, and I'm putting it on fairly heavy, because you can take it off without too much issue. And if you do this once and you notice areas that you didn't get the first time around, you can do it again. You can go back and keep doing this until you've got the finish that you want. And that's what's nice about it. And you do need to let it dry overnight each time, just to make sure that it's had a chance to fully dry and cure and set up well. So once we get all the way around, we can go back and look and see if we missed any spots that we want to touch back up again before we put it down to dry. And you can tell I'm putting it on quite heavy. And again, it's easier to do this once instead of doing it multiple times. So go ahead and put it on heavy. Don't get too silly, but put it on heavy enough that you know you're getting good coverage. It's inexpensive. Getting wood filler, the amount we use per rocket is very, very inexpensive. Okay. So now we've got all that covered. Yeah, I'm happy with that. We'll set this off to the side to dry. And let's go ahead and rinse out a brush. So I'm going to mix up some epoxy, and we're going to do the epoxy over the shock cord line, shock cord mount inside the rocket body tube. So we're going to do that next after I get some epoxy mixed up. I've got a lot of these Dixie cups. Originally got them to use for a birthday party for a bunch of little kids, and they work out really, really well for mixing up epoxy and other things from the hobby world of model rocketry. So I'm actually going to mix up a decent little amount because I want to get good coverage inside the tube. The reason I've got these upside down is because I'm on my last little bits, and it's kind of hard to get it out of the tubes when they're getting this low. Okay, so now let's mix that up really, really good. Now remember, epoxy makes heat when it is curing, so if you have plastic parts, don't use epoxy unless you have a way to keep it cool. Like if you're putting nose weight in your nose cone and you're going to pour epoxy, BBs in and then epoxy or lead shot and epoxy, put this thing in water, get that part under water, cold water, and just leave it in a cup of water, point it down overnight while it dries and hardens. Otherwise you're going to have a melted nose cone. If you can't do that, try and find another way, because epoxy does generate heat when setting. I've actually had these cups get very deformed from the heat coming off on them. Alright, so now I'm going to spoon up a dollop. I'm going to kind of paddle it on in there. And remember, you don't want to get any strands up inside the tube that's going to interfere with the nose cone sliding on, so be sure you don't get glue anywhere but on your mount. A little bit on the string. I'm trying to make sure I shove it all the way around inside there. Now it will self-level, so you're going to have a nice little pool of it right on top of the shock cord mount, which is fine with me. I just want to make sure I have all my edges feathered with it so that I reduce the chances of my parachute grabbing that and snagging. Last little bit. Right there on the end, I see a little air gap, and that's got that covered. Alright, so since the glue's got to harden and cure, we got to make sure that we have the shock cord part down. I'm making sure that that is down towards the counter. Alright, minions, hold that in place for me. And we're going to let that cure. Check it in about 5 or 10 minutes and see how it looks. And we're going to let this dry overnight. Then tomorrow we're going to sand the fins again. We're going to sand that fillet and make sure that we're finally happy with the final result. Then we'll join the fin can and the upper body tube together and do the spiral filling on that with the wood filler on that, and that's going to take overnight again to dry. Then we'll be sanding that and getting into our final stages of prep for primer and paint. So until next time, here we go. Alright, it's basically been 24 hours, and we are now ready to sand the wood filler that we've put on the rocket fin tube assembly to make sure we have a nice smooth fillet there. So we're just going to take it and sand on it, and there's a lot of wood filler there, of course, because I rather apply it and sand it once instead of apply sand. And I'm still using the 220 grit, and we're just going to sand down and smooth things out. Nice and pretty. See, I'm exposing some of the putty there again, and I'll probably expose quite a bit of putty as I go through. Get some of that excess off the tube and push into the putty on the fin. And this method will give you some really, really good looking fin fillets, and the overall appearance of the rocket is so much better. The hardest part of doing this is making sure you have the sandpaper round, so you're not gouging out sections, and that's looking real good right there, like that. So I'm going to switch up to finer sandpaper on that and sand that. But we're going to go through and we're going to sand all these with the 220, get it real close to where we will like it, and then finish off with like a 320 just to smooth it out a little bit more so we don't have sanding marks showing through. Again, working the nose area of the fin can be a little bit of a challenge, but just take your time and don't try and take off a lot of material at once until you get used to how this behaves while you're sanding it. Once you're used to how things are working, then you can kind of guesstimate how much pressure you actually need to put on something, and you're not going to over sand. Because remember, we don't want to take off the paper we put on the fins, because that'll really mess up our final look on our fins. So I'm going to take and lightly sand where the fin is. Get that excess off there. We're going to sand a little bit on the body tube. So if you notice, I sand a little bit and I feel. I sand a little bit and I feel. That way I'm not taking off too much. And I feel it again. It's looking better. And we just keep doing this until we have all three fins done. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this up, and then we'll get back on the camera, and we'll be gluing the two parts together. Then we're going to be doing the spiral filling, basically the same technique we used to fill this. Alright, we've got all the sanding done, and as you can see, it comes out pretty smooth. It's a real nice finish when you can get the fillets to look so well. The hardest part is sanding around the top of the nose, and of course getting the tail end. This fin's slightly out of alignment, but I'm not going to sweat it on this one. So after you're happy with your sanding, now we're going to turn around and we're going to mate our upper and lower body tubes together. When I do this, I'm going to be using just regular old white glue. We're going to do our dry fit first so it fits well. And then we're going to glue it together, and then I'm going to have to stand it on end again because we don't want the glue to puddle on one side and cause an off-balance issue. So I can stand it nose up or tail up, it doesn't matter. We just want to make sure we stand it up and give the glue sufficient time to dry. Now we don't have to use wood glue on this. We can go ahead and use just our regular white glue. And we're only going about a ½ inch, so we still want to use a fair amount of glue, but don't get crazy with it. This is the better way of doing it, if you were to smear the glue on the ring and then slide it in, you'd have glue come oozing out here and you'd have to wipe that all off. We always have our towel ready to wipe things off. But by putting it in here and smearing it around the inside of the tube, it's not going to go anywhere on the outside of the rocket. And if it does happen to ooze out, just immediately wipe it off, and it helps you have that nice clean exterior finish look. Okay, let's find our lineup marks. There's one, there's two, and again you want to use a lot of glue and you want to get it positioned quickly. And my marks are lined up. Now we'll stand it up. Now the reason you want to use a lot of glue is if you use a small amount of glue, once you put that in there, you only have a few seconds to get it and it's going to grab. And it'll grab quick. Whereas if you have a lot of glue, it's kind of like lubricating it and gives you a little bit extra, few seconds of playing around with it. But again, you want to get a lot of glue and then get it in there and get it in position quickly and rapidly. And then flip it either right side up or upside down so you don't have issues with the glue running to one side of the tube or the other, causing a lopsided issue. I'm not worried about glue running into the engine mount area because obviously the engine mount is smaller. If it did run, it would run and pool on the inside of the ring area, which is no big deal. When we did the engine mount, we did that so that the tail faced up, so gravity would make any glue that ran anywhere run inside the tube area and not in the motor tube area. So I'm going to let this dry for 10-15 minutes, and then we're going to go ahead and start filling in our spirals on our tube. Alright, we've let the glue dry up pretty good so it's all firm in there. Now we're going to go ahead and fill in our tube spirals. So I'm going to wrap this shot cord up tight. And I'm leaving in the card that it came on so that I can handle it better instead of having a loose cord running around. And I'm going to just tuck that in the end of the tube up here. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and ball it up and stick it inside the tube. Now, remember, you don't want to go sticking your shot cord in your tube too early after your epoxy's in there, because it might be 5-minute epoxy, but it'll be tacky for a day or two. So be sure all the tackiness is gone before you go shoving your shot cord in there to prevent you from having issues with it being stuck inside the rocket. I had that happen with one rocket, and I was really terrified I was going to damage it trying to peel the shot cord out. Okay, so we got our shot cord tucked away, and we've already mixed up our wood putty. We've got our brush, and we're just going to fill the spirals in. We're going to do this from one end to the other, and then I'm going to stick it onto my little tool here that I can jam in the end and let it dry so that it's not touching anything. So we're just going to take and dab it on the spirals. And we want to fill the spirals in. Reasonably well. And I've got a little bit much down here on the bottom one, so I'm just going to kind of lightly wipe it, get some of that excess off. And we'll go to the next one and we'll dab some on this. And that's basically all we're going to do now, is just go all the way around the tube. And it's okay if you have a little bit much on any one stripe, because you're going to sand most of this off actually. But it's better to have a little bit more than you need on than to sand it and find out that you don't have enough. So we're almost done with these. Then we'll do the main spiral going up the body tube. And again, we did pre-sand all our body tubes before we start doing anything, because we know that the shininess means that glue is not going to adhere to it, and it's easier to mark it and see your marks if you have it all sanded down. Okay. Let's find that other spiral. There he is. Sometimes it's hard to see these spirals. I actually have multiple lights that I can use on my workstation. Some of them go sideways because you can see things shadowed. When I'm sanding, I always like to hold things, have a light come at it sideways, and I'm looking at the top as I rotate, and I'm looking for shadows. It lets me know if I have a high spot. Alright, now we're up to the centerpiece. I'm actually going to put quite a bit on this center ridge because I am trying to fill it in. I'm trying to raise it so that I can sand it down and hopefully make it disappear. This is how you can get your multiple tube rockets to look like one long continuous tube. So I'm going around a couple times. So that's basically it. We're going to continue working our way up the body tube and go up a little bit on one spiral because there's generally 2 spirals per body tube, and then go back and pick up that other spiral if you can find it. Sometimes they're really hard to spot. And just keep doing that all the way up the rocket until you have filled in all your spirals. Let it dry overnight, and after that's dry, you'll be doing the sanding. So until tomorrow when we do sanding again, have a great evening. Alright, it's been over 24 hours now, and we're to a point where we can do the sanding on the body. As you can see, we went ahead and we got all the spiral painted down with our wood filler. And I'm just going to use 320 sandpaper, and I'm literally just going to wrap it around and sand. And again, we're going to be taking most of this off. I'm using 320 because I don't want to go at it too aggressively. I'm trying to get a smooth finish. So we'll start up here and just kind of work our way around the body tube. And the idea is just to take off enough to smooth everything out. There's going to be a little bit left over all the way around, obviously. And if we need to, we can go back and touch up an area if we took too much off or we didn't get enough into a spot. And then we're just going to sand all the way around. And once we start getting to a point where we're down, we're feeling for bumps and is it smooth or is it not smooth. So we're going to work all the way around and do that. And once we're done, we'll be ready for primer. And unfortunately, we're not going to be priming for a while. The humidity levels out here really make it heck for painting paper products in the rain until you dry them out really well. And I'm not going to be able to do that for a little while, so we're going to put off probably maybe 3 or 4 weeks even doing the paint job. And it's going to give me a little time to play around on how I'm going to paint this. So this is getting completed. I'll come back and we'll see what it looks like when I finish sanding it. And then it'll be a few weeks till we actually do the paint job on it. Alright, so now we're going to cut our launch lug and glue it onto the body. It's a 2-inch launch lug. It says to cut it in half, and then we're going to glue one flush with the bottom and then 10 inches up. Now you can cut with an X-Acto knife, or if you have something like a Dremel and you're very careful, you can cut with that too. Just remember, wear your safety glasses, try and cut straight. And watch out for the binding like that. Nice and slow and easy. And there we go. Now I am going to have to dress the edge up a little bit, but that's okay. I don't mind dressing up the edge a little bit. It's a little bit easier than if you accidentally crush it, and with an X-Acto knife it's not really sharp. Always put your tools away after you're done with them.
Okay, to dress it up, we're just going to take some 220, and we're just going to sand the edge lightly. Get rid of all that fuzz and fur that we put on there. Hold it straight up and down and do little circles, even it out some. If you need to, you can take your hobby knife and go around the inside to clean that up a little bit. This side actually came out better than the other side did. Now I will be using epoxy to glue this on. It is a high stress point, so I do like to make sure that it's on there as best as I possibly can get it on there. And again, if it's shiny, we're going to buff it with sand, or scuff it with sandpaper. And since this is shiny, guess what? We're scuffing it with sandpaper. Okay, you can see that that came out fairly decently there. Now I'm just going to take the sandpaper and kind of scuff it up a little bit. Okay, so that knocked shine off of it. And back to this first piece, a little bit more. Okay, so now we're going to get the rocket. We're going to mix up the epoxy, and we're going to put that on there. I'll be using my 5-minute epoxy again. And remember, don't go cheap with your epoxy and your glues. Go ahead and buy good quality glues, because if you go cheap with the glue, you're looking at a failure. If you have a failure, you've lost a rocket, you've lost a lot of money, and nobody likes to lose money on a rocket. Now I did reapply some putty along this section here. That's where the two body tubes join, and it's mainly because I didn't like the way it sanded out, but I can still do my epoxy while I'm waiting for that to dry. And then after that's all said and done, I'll probably be doing a epoxy glue clay on that also, to get that nice and aerodynamic. I love the fix-it epoxy for the fact that it is so easy to use. You just have to remember, if it's cold out, it's going to be really, really, really lethargic to cure if your room is cold. Alright, mix, 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 mix. And you can see I've already marked my 10-inch mark right there. That's the bottom of the second launch lug. The first launch lug is going flush with the bottom. And what I like to do, instead of putting the glue on here and then having to worry about getting glue all over my fingers, I'm going to mark how high up on the tube that it needs to go. So now we know that we need to come up to that part, and then we go up to here, and we'll be going up to there. So now I've got two marks, and I'm going to come just shy on both marks with the epoxy, and then I'm going to set them in place carefully after I've put the glue on there. Now it doesn't take a whole lot. Remember, this is epoxy, so it's going to grab on there pretty good. Doesn't take a whole heck of a lot. So we'll put just a nice little line right on our line. It'll come up short. And I'm putting my cut ends facing down. Alright, that one looks nice and pretty. Now remember, you have to keep things straight because it will move around until the epoxy sets. Here's my epoxy. Now, if you're worried about making sure you have your launch lugs lined up straight, what you can do is you can run anything from a launch rail to here. I've got a little bamboo skewer. I'm going to make sure that they're both lined up properly. And I'm happy where they're at. You could leave it like that if you want. I'm going to actually take the skewer out after I'm sure I've got everything right where I want it. I'm going to take it out just by tipping it. That way you're not bumping things around. We're going to eyeball it again. And it looks good. So we'll grab my little block here. And the little stand that came with it. And we're going to set it on that. We're going to let that epoxy dry for 5 minutes before we move it again. So that's pretty much it on the build until we go to do the paint job. Of course, I will sand this down and get this a little bit smoother. Then we'll get in, we're going to do the paint job. We did not glue it. It actually says it in the instructions, so I'm happy about that. We did not glue the payload bay to the adapter yet, or the reducer, because we are going to paint this. We want it to match color, not see primer or bare wood. So we're going to paint this, and then we'll apply a small bead of glue on the bottom of the tube and slide it up in there, and then it'll all look nice and pretty. Same thing with the top of the nose cones. I'm going to paint everything, including the inside part of the nose cone. That'll get primed and painted, and it'll give everything a much better finished look, which is what we want to make sure we have anyways. So we're going to go ahead and let this epoxy dry, and once we get the last little bit of the build done, we'll put it back up there for everybody to see what the colors look like. Till then, keep them flying high and keep them safe.